There is one name every schoolchild learns when they study ancient Rome. Julius Caesar, general, statesman, conqueror, the man who made Rome the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. He wrote his own history, literally. Caesar authored detailed accounts of his own military campaigns, books that are still read in universities today. And in those books, Caesar describes every battle he ever fought, every siege, every victory, every brilliant tactical maneuver. But there is one battle he describes in less than 3 paragraphs. One battle he glosses over with careful, vague, almost embarrassed language. One battle where the greatest general in Roman history, a man who had never lost, walked into a hillside in central Gaul and got completely, catastrophically destroyed. The Battle of Gergovia, 52 BC, the day Rome bled in the mountains. The day a shepherd's son from Gaul handed Julius Caesar the worst military defeat of his entire life. And almost nobody today knows this story. Most people know Caesar as the man who conquered all of Gaul, the man who turned France into a Roman province, the man who marched his armies further and faster than any general before or since. But what most people do not know is that Gaul was not a walkover. It was not a parade. It was 8 years of brutal, grinding, often desperate warfare against people who refused to give up their land without a fight. And at the center of that resistance was one of the most remarkable military leaders the ancient world ever produced. A man whose name Rome feared, whose story Rome tried to suppress, and whose legacy France eventually reclaimed as a national symbol of resistance. His name was Vercingetorix, and at Gergovia, he did what no one believed was possible. He made Caesar run. The world before the battle. To understand why Gergovia mattered so much, you need to understand what was happening in Gaul in 52 BC, and how close Rome came to losing everything it had spent 8 years building. Caesar had been campaigning in Gaul since 58 BC, 6 years of almost continuous warfare that had brought most of the region under Roman control. Most Gallic tribes had been defeated, taxed, occupied, and forced to supply soldiers and grain to the Roman war machine. The resistance was being ground down, slowly, systematically, brutally. But the Gauls had not forgotten who they were, and in the winter of 53 to 52 BC, something extraordinary happened. The tribes began to talk to each other. Different peoples who had been rivals and enemies for generations began to ask a question they had never seriously asked before. What if we all stood together? Vercingetorix was the son of a Gallic chieftain named Celtillus of the Arverni tribe, one of the most powerful peoples in central Gaul. His father had once attempted to become king over all the Gauls, an unprecedented ambition, and had been executed by his own tribe for trying. Vercingetorix grew up in the shadow of his father's failure. He was young, probably in his late 20s, when the revolt of 52 BC began. But unlike his father, Vercingetorix did not want to be king for personal glory. He wanted to drive Rome out of Gaul. That was his singular, consuming purpose. When the revolt began in early 52 BC, Vercingetorix was initially expelled from his own city of Gergovia by tribal leaders loyal to Rome. He gathered followers outside the walls and forced his way back in. It was an act of sheer personal magnetism and force of will. And it told the other tribes everything they needed to know about this man. Within weeks, tribe after tribe was pledging soldiers, horses, and grain to the rebellion. Vercingetorix had done what his father could not. He had united Gaul. The strategy that nearly beat Rome. Here is where Vercingetorix did something that proved he was not just a brave warrior, but a genuinely brilliant, strategic mind. Something Caesar himself begrudgingly acknowledged. He adopted a scorched earth policy, something almost unheard of in ancient warfare. He ordered the Gauls to burn their own towns, destroy their own grain stores, and deny Rome the ability to feed its army. This was a devastating idea. Roman armies moved fast and lived off the land. They needed grain, livestock, and supplies from the territory they occupied. Deny them that, and even the greatest army in the world slowly starves. Vercingetorix also understood something about cavalry that no Gallic leader before him had truly exploited. Gallic horsemen were among the best in the ancient world, and he intended to use them to strangle Roman supply lines. Caesar suddenly found himself fighting a completely different kind of war. Instead of pitched battles where Roman discipline and training dominated, he was fighting an elusive enemy who refused to meet him in the open. And Vercingetorix chose his ground carefully, very carefully. When he decided to make his stand, he chose the most naturally defensible position in all of Gaul, Gergovia, a hilltop town of the Arverni, sitting on a plateau 300 meters above the surrounding plains. Natural walls of sheer rock on three sides. Caesar looked at it and made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. In the spring of 52 BC, Julius Caesar marched his army south into the territory of the Arverni, with a problem he had never faced before. He had 6 legions, approximately 35,000 to 40,000 men. Professional soldiers, the finest infantry force the ancient world had ever produced. Men who had marched from Britain to the Rhine without losing a single battle. But those men needed to eat, and Vercingetorix had burned everything for 50 miles in every direction. Caesar needed a decisive victory, fast. He needed to break the rebellion before his army ran out of food, and before the allied tribes began to question whether Rome could actually win this time. He decided to besiege Gergovia. It was a controversial decision. His own officers questioned it. The hill was enormous, the walls were strong, and Vercingetorix had an army inside that outnumbered the Roman force. Caesar established 2 Roman camps, a larger main camp and a smaller secondary camp, connected by a pair of parallel trenches that allowed soldiers to move between them without being attacked. It was careful, methodical Roman engineering at its best. But it was also a siege army that was too small to actually surround the hill. Vercingetorix could receive reinforcements and supplies from the open northern side. The first Roman blood. For weeks, the two armies watched each other from a distance. Roman soldiers building and digging, Gallic warriors watching from the walls above. The siege was a stalemate, and stalemates favored the defenders. Then Caesar received intelligence, or believed he received intelligence, that Vercingetorix was moving a large portion of his cavalry and infantry to a new position on the southern slope. Caesar saw an opportunity. If Vercingetorix was redistributing his forces, the northern approach might be weakened. He decided to launch a diversionary attack on one section of the wall, while secretly moving his main force. Early on the morning of the assault, Roman forces seized a Gallic camp on a ridge below the main walls, an important preliminary position that gave them higher ground than they had held before. Encouraged by this early success, and by the sight of Gallic troops appearing to pull back, Caesar gave an order that would define his career. He ordered a full assault on the walls of Gergovia. The Roman soldiers had to climb 300 meters of steep, rocky hillside, in full armor, carrying shields and weapons, while Gallic defenders above threw spears, rocks, and arrows down on them. Gallic defenders hurled massive rocks down the slope. They threw spears. They rolled logs. The Romans had no cover, no shelter, and no way to move quickly on ground that was designed by nature to be impossible to assault. But the Romans were disciplined and brave. And the initial assault actually broke through the first line of Gallic defenses. Roman soldiers reached the outer wall. Some climbed over. For one brief, extraordinary moment, it looked like Caesar might actually pull it off. And then Vercingetorix did something masterful. He had kept an enormous reserve force, cavalry and infantry, hidden from Roman view on the far side of the plateau. Now he unleashed them. Simultaneously, women and old men on the walls above, who had been watching the battle, began throwing down their own valuables, their own clothing, begging the Romans to take it and leave. It was a psychological trick, and it worked. The Roman soldiers who had broken through the first wall suddenly found themselves surrounded. Gallic reinforcements poured in from 3 directions. The breach became a death trap. Caesar, watching from the plain below, saw what was happening. He immediately ordered the retreat signal. The Roman red cloak was raised. Trumpets called the recall. But the soldiers could not hear the trumpets over the noise of the battle. Or they chose not to hear them. They pressed forward, deeper into the trap. The retreat became a rout. Roman soldiers, the finest infantry in the ancient world, turned and ran down a steep hillside under a hail of Gallic spears and rocks, scrambling over their own dead to escape. 730 Roman soldiers died on that hillside, including, devastatingly, 46 Roman centurions. The centurions were the backbone of the Roman army. Losing 46 in a single engagement was catastrophic. Caesar had to personally ride forward with his cavalry to stop the rout from becoming a complete annihilation. He met his soldiers as they fled and physically turned them around, shaming them back into formation. That night, Caesar sat in his command tent and began writing. He described the engagement as a deliberate withdrawal, a planned strategic repositioning, and assigned blame to his soldiers for advancing beyond their orders. The morning after the Battle of Gergovia, Julius Caesar did something he had never done before in 8 years of campaigning in Gaul. He broke camp. He ordered his army to march away from Gergovia. Julius Caesar retreated. Above them, on the walls of Gergovia, Gallic warriors watched the Romans leave and sent up a roar that rolled across the valleys for miles. News of the Roman defeat spread across Gaul like wildfire. Tribes that had been sitting on the fence, waiting to see who would win, began joining Vercingetorix in their thousands. Caesar's position in Gaul, 8 years in the making, was suddenly in serious danger of collapsing entirely. His Aedui allies, Rome's most loyal Gallic partners, switched sides and went over to Vercingetorix. Caesar was now fighting in hostile territory with a shrinking supply chain, defecting allies, and an enemy who had just proven that the Roman legions could be beaten. Vercingetorix stood at the peak of his power in the summer of 52 BC. He had done what no Gallic leader before him had ever done. He had defeated Rome in the field. But victory contains the seeds of its own destruction, and the euphoria of Gergovia made Vercingetorix's coalition overconfident. His allied chieftains pushed him to go on the offensive, to chase Caesar, attack him in the open, and end this once and for all. Vercingetorix's greatest strength, his strategic patience, was about to be overruled by his coalition. 3 months after Gergovia, at a place called Alesia, another hilltop fortress, Vercingetorix made his final stand. This time, Caesar came with reinforcements and built a double ring of siege works completely surrounding the hill. A massive Gallic relief army attacked from outside, while Vercingetorix's force broke out from within. A two-sided battle that stretched Caesar's genius to its absolute limit. Caesar won. Barely. Against odds that most commanders would have considered hopeless. After weeks of siege and 2 days of brutal fighting on 2 fronts, the Gallic relief army broke and fled. Vercingetorix surrendered the following morning. He rode out of the gates of Alesia in full armor on his finest horse, circled Caesar's position, dismounted, removed his weapons, and sat at Caesar's feet. After Alesia, Caesar returned to Rome a conqueror. He held a magnificent triumph. He paraded Vercingetorix through the streets of Rome in chains. He published his account of the Gallic Wars and was celebrated as the greatest general of his age. And in that account, the Commentari de Bello Gallico, he described Gergovia carefully, with a few paragraphs, with vague language, with blame distributed to his soldiers, with no admission that he had simply been out-generaled. This was not an accident. Caesar was a brilliant writer as well as a brilliant general. Every word he chose was deliberate, and his choice to minimize Gergovia tells us something profound about what Gergovia actually meant. It scared him, not just tactically, but existentially, because Gergovia proved something that Caesar's entire political career was built on denying, that he could lose. Caesar's power in Rome was inseparable from his military reputation. He was the man who had never lost. The moment his enemies learned he could be beaten, that moment became politically dangerous. What Gergovia tells us about Vercingetorix, but here is what I want you to take away from this story, because I think it is one of the most important points in all of ancient history. Vercingetorix is one of the greatest military strategists of the ancient world. Full stop. No qualification needed. He united tribes that had been enemies for centuries. He designed a strategic doctrine, scorched earth plus cavalry interdiction, that modern military historians recognize as genuinely sophisticated. And at Gergovia, he executed it perfectly. He beat Caesar fair and square, not through luck, not through numbers alone, through better planning, better terrain selection, better reading of Roman psychology, and better execution on the day. His only failure was not being able to hold his coalition together long enough. The tribal politics of Gaul, the same dynamics that made his coalition possible, also made it fragile. In another time, with a more unified nation behind him, with professional armies and standing institutions rather than tribal confederacies, Vercingetorix might have changed everything. 2,000 years later, in the 19th century, France rediscovered Vercingetorix. Napoleon III, himself an ambitious leader trying to build a national identity, funded massive archaeological excavations of both Gergovia and Alesia. A colossal statue of Vercingetorix was erected on the Alesia site in 1865, with Napoleon III's own face on the body. He wanted to identify his empire with the spirit of Gallic resistance. The politics of ancient history made modern. Today, Vercingetorix is a national hero of France. His face appears on school walls. His name is known to every French child. The man Rome tried to erase from history became the founding symbol of French identity. And Gergovia, that hillside where Caesar bled and ran, stands in the Auvergne today as a quiet, mostly unvisited plateau. No tourist buses, no famous ruins, just the wind, the grass, and the view. But the ground remembers. The ground always remembers. History is not just the stories of winners. It is the stories of everyone who fought. Everyone who refused to accept that the most powerful force in the world was automatically right, automatically unstoppable, automatically destined to win. Vercingetorix stood on that hilltop in 52 BC and looked down at the greatest army the world had ever produced. And he made them run. One day, one hill. One man who refused to believe Rome was inevitable. That is the battle Julius Caesar never talked about, and now you know why. If this story got you, if you felt the weight of what happened on that hillside 2,000 years ago, then hit subscribe right now, because Empires Unearthed exists for exactly this reason. To find the stories history buried and bring them back to life. History is not just the past. It is the foundation you are standing on right now, and it is full of stories that are waiting to be told.